Earlier this month, a new exhibit at the Art Institute opened. It's Van Gogh and the Avant-Garde, the Modern Landscape. And it's an exhibit that's really focused on a very short period in the life of Vincent van Gogh. It's really from the time of May till June of 1887. Van Gogh was born in the Netherlands in 1853, and in 1886, he moved to Paris to kind of be in the center of the artistic world. And as he painted in Paris and the Parisian cafes and all those kinds of things, he became kind of disconcerted with the subject life that he was painting. He felt he needed something more, something different. And so he and 4 other artists decided to start painting in the suburbs of Paris, which at the time was really kind of an avant-garde thing, because in the suburbs of Paris, new communities were being formed, but there were also a lot of the industry was located in the suburbs of Paris. So in these paintings, you often see neighborhood scenes or country scenes, but then there's always this industry that's in the background that you see. And during this time, Van Gogh experimented with different styles of art, especially what's called divisionism or pointillism, as some people know it, that George Seurat was very famous and known for, and he was one of the people who were experimenting in the suburbs of France. I really enjoyed the exhibit. I encourage you to go see it if you get the chance to do it. But there was a kind of a nagging feeling that I had as I was walking through the exhibit and looking at the paintings, especially Van Gogh's paintings. I felt that they just didn't seem right. There's something was missing. They were rather drab, to be honest with you. They were kind of dark, although they're much lighter than his earlier works, but still, they're not what I usually think of when I think of Vincent van Gogh. When we think of Vincent van Gogh, we think, of course, of the Starry Night, and we think of the beautiful sunflower series that he made. Well, all of those paintings actually happened after he left Paris. So in 1888, in February of 1888, Vincent van Gogh decided to leave Paris and to move to the south of France, to the city of Arles. And he moved into what was called at the time the Yellow House. It was a little house that was painted yellow. And he lived with Gauguin for a while. And this is where really his art kind of came to its fruition, to its fullness. And it's the art that we know Vincent van Gogh for. And what's really interesting about this period compared to what we saw or what you can see at the Art Institute right now is the predominance use of the color yellow. Of course, he used yellow in his compositions all his lifetime, but they weren't as predominant as they are in that series of paintings that he did while he was in the south of France. Because in the south of France, he wanted to capture the light of that part of the country. And so yellow is a big portion of his paintings. The art critic Robert Hughes says this about Van Gogh. Van Gogh perceived color as having a psychological and moral weight. Yellow meant the most to him because it symbolized emotional truth. He used yellow as a symbol for sunlight, life, and God. Yellow really made all the difference in his painting. And those are the paintings that we remember him most for from that time that he was in the south of France. Today we celebrate the Feast of Pentecost. And if you were paying attention to the readings, you will have noticed that there are 2 distinct stories of the Pentecost. The events and details and the time is different in both of them. And we might be caught up in the question of, well, which one is it? Which one did it? Which one really happened? And really that doesn't help us any at this point, but I'm going to focus mostly on the second version that we heard, which is John's Gospel, which takes place on the evening of the resurrection. So not 50 days afterwards, like we heard in Luke's version in the Acts of the Apostles, but on the evening of the resurrection, Jesus appeared to his disciples one more time. And we hear that he says to them, "Peace be with you." He offers them peace be with you 2 times. And then he breathes the Holy Spirit upon them. And with that, he says to them, "Whose sins you forgive are forgiven, and whose sins you held bound are held bound." And that's the Pentecost event according to St. John. St. Luke's version, which has all those wonderful details of the wind and all the tongues of fire coming down upon them, are really kind of the what of the event in terms of the details. Whereas St. John's version is the why. He's trying to explain the significance of Pentecost. And so I want to focus on that, the significance of Pentecost. Because Pentecost is really the recreation of the lives of the disciples, and really of our lives as well too. Remember again what had happened 3 days earlier. As Jesus was being crucified on the cross, all his disciples except St. John had fled, had left. They abandoned him. Peter denied him 3 times. And so you can imagine the disciples being caught up in their grief, but also caught up in their guilt, and caught up in the sense of disorder that death usually brings in the lives of people. And the Holy Spirit, and Jesus appears to them with the gift of the Holy Spirit on the evening of the resurrection. And with the breathing of the Holy Spirit, Jesus does what God did at the beginning of it all in the book of Genesis. When God created the world and God breathed upon the waters as a sign of the beginning of creation. And Jesus did the same with his disciples and does with us. That as he breathed on his disciples, he recreated their world. Where there was chaos, now there was order. But more importantly, he freed them of their guilt. He freed them of the responsibilities that they had for his own death. Jesus didn't come to them and say to them, "What happened? Where were you? Why'd you do this to me? Why'd you deny me?" There's none of that. Rather, Jesus offers them something much more profound. He offers them peace. He offers them reconciliation. He forgave them for their shortcomings, for their failures. But then he reminds them and us of the power of forgiveness. Whose sins you forgive are forgiven, and whose sins you held bound are going to be held bound. And the importance with that, my friends, is that just as we have experienced the power of forgiveness in our own lives, we too have the ability to forgive others, to free them and ourselves of the bounds that resentment usually holds. Then we hold on to grudges. We usually are enslaved in that. And forgiveness is what frees us from all of that, just as it happened with the disciples. I shared this story before, and I shared it actually with a parishioner just a few days ago. When my dad died almost 20 years ago, there was a long time in my life when I was really angry with God. My dad died at the age of 63 after a 20-plus year battle with lupus. And I was angry with God as to why he did this to such a good man, a young man. I was angry. But eventually, after years had passed, I came to realize that because my dad was sick for so many years, that there was a grace that I received because of that. You see, every time I went home, every time I visited from college, my dad was always there because he wasn't working anymore. He was sick. Had he been working, my time with my father would have been much less. But because he was always home, I was given that great gift of time with my father. Now again, that took me many years to get to that point of being able to forgive God for what happened and to be okay with the life that God had given my dad, 63 years of it. Again, in the story in the Acts of the Apostles, it takes place over a long time. There's 50 days that pass between the resurrection and Pentecost. St. Luke is trying to communicate to us that process that happens in our lives. That forgiveness doesn't happen automatically. That peace doesn't come right away. When we lose someone in our lives, when we suffer a loss, or when we grieve, we don't get over it right away. There's time that needs to go through that. When someone hurts us, again, forgiveness doesn't come automatically. We have to process some of that before we get to that point. When we feel rejected, like when we lose our job, we don't get over that automatically. It takes time to get through that. But once we do, we get to the point where we realize, oh, this is what the significance is for me in my life. This is how this event, which was unfortunate, painful even, has been a dramatic change in my life for the better. It's the new job that you find, that you realize, oh, this is it. This is what I was meant to do. It's the reestablishment of that friendship that perhaps had been fractured, and now you are closer than ever before. It's that realizing how faith helps us to be connected with our loved ones, even through death. The how takes time, but the why is what's important. And that's what the Holy Spirit offers us, my friends, when we face our own challenges, our own trials in life. In many ways, the gift of the Holy Spirit that is freely given to us, which we celebrate today, is the yellow on the canvas of our spiritual lives. It's the truth, it's the light, and it's the presence of God.